Welcome to Get Big Out Loud Radio, where we explore living the complex, funny, and beautiful ride of life with me, Kari Knutson, and Dr. Pat on transformationtalkradio.com. Are your thoughts keeping you small? Are you ready to get big? I will offer you ideas to transform what you are thinking into conscious action. Explore what is keeping you small and how to shift your behaviors in order to get big. Learn what is possible for you. Get ready to get big and live life out loud starting now.
Well, hey, everybody. What a show we have. I'm Dr. Pat, and I take this beautiful ride of life with the most incredible Kari Knutson. Today, okay, this is a good one. This is a good one. I can't wait to hear what Kari has to say about it. The stories we keep editing. And editing and editing and editing. When are we going to publish? So today we're going to talk about these, we are human beings, we're natural storytellers. We really are. I mean, whether you're watching a sports show or you're watching a drama, or it doesn't matter, or you're listening to something, or you're reading something, or you're maybe talking to your children, or maybe having a conversation with your family. It's the art of the story. For centuries, we've done this. We share experience. But what are the stories we tell ourselves? What are we saying to ourselves? How are we saying it to ourselves? And in this episode of Get Big Out Loud, we're going to explore the storytelling. We're going to explore what matters, what the identities of our stories are, what they tell us, what we tell ourselves, and how they actually shape the landscape of our lives. Kari, thank you for taking this topic on. Ooh-wee.
I know. I was really thinking about it. As you know, I always love to do podcasts related to something that I'm currently really thinking about or using in my talks or grappling with. And I really thought this idea about the stories we don't only tell ourselves, but the stories we keep editing, like you said, when do we stop editing them? And also, why do we edit them? And so I was just thinking about this idea of our natural inclination to share our stuff through stories, but then there's stories that get told, like we tell them our greatest hits, and then there's stories that we never tell for all kinds of reasons, and then there's stories that we edit depending on the audience, so I think it just wanted to, like, again, not in a good or bad way necessarily, just as a curious way. How do the stories we tell shape our identity? How do the stories we not tell impact our identity? And then why do we edit stories, for better or for worse, right? Like, why do we edit our stories? And so that's what I want to get into today, and then through the lens of curiosity, always curiosity. Like, it's an interesting, I think, thing to think about, especially if you're trying as a human being, which most of us, I think, are trying, like, how do I know myself? How do I know my identity and who I am? Also, when you want to change something about yourself, sometimes we're like, I'm not that person anymore, but like my friends and family see me this way, or I even see myself this way. Am I capable of change? So that's why exploring stories can also be really powerful. If you think about parts of your life where you want to change or shift or really get some insight, looking to your stories can be very powerful. So that's my whole offering today.
I love it. I love it. So let's get at it too, because I noticed something as I was preparing for this show, where I think one of the questions that I think gets asked are the questions of what are the stories we tell over and over about ourselves? What do we repeat? How did they shape us? How true did they become after time? And let's start at the beginning where you want to start. What are some of the stories? What do we know about stories? What do we know about why we tell them, why we don't tell them, and why they're important?
Sure. So like you said, first, human beings are storytelling machines. We're natural storytellers. Like, we tell stories to pass down information, to connect our family stories. So like, here's your family history. We share stories to make us laugh. We share stories to scare each other. Like, we tell all kinds of stories, right? And you think about books and movies, we're storytelling machines. It's how we process our world, through story. And sometimes you can tell a story, instead of explaining an emotion, you tell a story that shows the emotion. Like, instead of saying, now we're going to talk about embarrassment, you tell a story about embarrassment, and everyone then can relate to that rather than embarrassment is the feeling of when other people see something they shouldn't see and that you're scared of them seeing, and then it's weird. Versus like, I think like a story I tell about embarrassment is when I was giving a presentation and I was wearing tights and a dress and my tights started coming down on their own. And I tell that in one of my presentations. I use it as an example of how do you get through an embarrassing moment and be resilient. But I don't say this is going to be a story about embarrassing moments. I just tell what I did, and you see people like, oh my God, her tights are coming down, her embarrassing, right? You see the response. So we tell stories because it connects people in ways that if we're more direct, sometimes we lose the ability to capture our imagination or capture the experience. So we're natural storytelling machines. And what we tend to do too is most of us have what I again would say the greatest hits version of ourselves. So if I said, hey, tell me about yourself, automatically most people will go to a few stories or where'd you grow up, or when you're, and you might tell certain stories when you're meeting someone new, certain stories at an interview, certain stories on a first date, certain stories when you get together for family gatherings. And these are what I call like your greatest hits. You just know them, you know, their land, you know, the parts that are funny, you know, that people like them, they're time tested. Oh, everyone loves the story about the time that this happened, right? You just know it. Everyone has those moments where like, we're going to tell this story. Or when I know in our story at our family, when we tell the story, like the kids can finish this. And then do you remember when this happened? They said, yes. And then you said this, and then this, like they can finish because it's very scripted in a way. We know what part of the story comes next, and it's our greatest hits version. And sometimes what I like to say too is sometimes we're giving the TED Talk version of ourselves with our greatest stories. Like when you think of what stories will make me look a certain way, which stories are appropriate for this group of people or whatever, we kind of know our stories, and that's not a bad thing at all. I think it's just interesting to see if you looked at the stories you tell, and some of them might still fit you, maybe, because some of them though, like if you're always telling a story where so and so, well, you're always the good one, and you always do this, and you always do that, and it like we get into these roles. Like if every story is about someone like who might be the positive one or the happy one who always finds a way through.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you feel like, well, do I sometimes not? Am I sometimes not positive? But then you get into that role in the story, and then you can't be anything else but the good kid or the kid that always gets through it. Like, do I maybe have other feelings or experiences? Do I maybe not sometimes? So like, you know, that feeling of like sometimes our stories put us into roles, and we might have outgrown those, or we might be, which is what I think is we're more complex than that. We're not just one thing, we're many things. And that's why it's interesting. The first section is, you know, the stories that are our greatest hits, the stories we tell. What are we telling about ourselves, you know, in those stories?
Yeah. I love this conversation because it's fascinating when I think about this, and I think about how I show up, right, in different places. And you know, how do I show up when I'm sitting on an airplane and somebody sees me doing something on my laptop or something and makes a comment, and then it turns into a conversation? Who am I in that moment? Am I the polished story about who I am in that moment? Am I the funny story? You know, am I the story that's going to share how vulnerable I am, that I have to spend 6 hours on a plane working on a spreadsheet? You know, or do I want to tell a story that doesn't want another question? So my story is right to the point and don't bother me because I'm working. But all of these have to do with the level of awareness. And sometimes, Kari, and this is to your point, sometimes we're just not aware enough to know who we are in the moment of that given story versus who we want to be in the moment of that given story. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. And that's, again, we kind of get in habitual patterns. And our brain kind of likes to know what it knows. And so sometimes it's hard when we're trying to shift something. We just kind of got to go back to what we know and what we say and what we do. So like you said, in that airport situation, depending on what you want out of the conversation, you might keep things short. You might engage someone. If someone on a plane says, what do you do for a living? And you think, like, I talked to someone recently who was he's essentially an assessor for taxes on property. He's like, I never like to start with that because then everyone's like hates me and they never like want to get to know me as a person, right? His name is
Yeah.
like whatever his name, I'll call him Rick. All right. So like Rick, I'm a person, but the minute I say what I do, if people have a story about me and taxes and money and property and how horrible I must be. So he's like, I really have to say, like, find other things to redirect people to, because depending on the situation, I don't, the story of myself is something that with my job turns people away.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's an interesting thing. Like, what do you want out of the conversation? How are you trying to connect with somebody or not? And then, like, our identities, sometimes we get so wrapped up in our work that we also think like the story of our work is our identity. Like, all I am is this. And then again, it's hard to, like, I think sometimes when people, like, let's say I'm talking to someone and I say, I'm a therapist, they say I'm an accountant. And I'm like, okay, well, then now we have nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
Versus the story of like, where are you from? What things interest you? How long have you been here? Like, what's your favorite thing that you've done in Denver or whatever, like other ways we can connect with people that they can tell us a story about something else, or we can make a connection. And I
Yeah.
think usually with our greatest hits, we know enough about ourselves to like put up the greatest hits or to put up what we know in a networking situation versus I'm going to a party and I've never met these people. What stories are safe to tell? What stories will people like? What stories of, and again, this isn't bad necessarily, but it's just good to think of what stories do I tell time and again? And to me, what parts of those things are kind of ingrained
Yeah.
in how I think about myself? And are any of those things more complex than how I'm presenting them? Or can I see myself as like, oh, in this story, I'm always, every story, like I'll say this for my family. In my family, I'm the good kid and my sister's the bad kid. There it is. I'm the good one, she's the bad one. I did this good thing, she always got in trouble, right? And then that's it. It's so polarized. And in fact, that is not always true, right? But if you think about the family story, then she gets to be the kid that always got in trouble, and I get to be the kid that always didn't. And that again boxes us in sometimes to be like, no, that's not the whole story. It's not. But in family stories, you usually tell them in a certain way. So again, it's just an opportunity to connect with your identity. And sometimes when I'll say, what's the greatest hits version? And if you even wrote down a couple of like, we always tell this at a family gathering, I'll tell this in a networking thing, I'll tell this, it gives
Yeah.
you a sense of like how you see yourself and
Yeah.
the stories that are worth telling. And then it gives you an opportunity to say, what other stories? Why am I not telling this story? Like, is it on purpose? Have I tucked away? Have I forgotten about it? Is it because it doesn't present me in this way? But it's kind of a good exercise just to think, what are my greatest hits and the stories that I keep telling? What does it say about me? In a curious way. We're not looking for judgment, we're looking for insight.
Yeah. I have been on a little rant because I've been sharing this story about an amazing actor, which I won't go into today, but I've been sharing her story on what she did to create a technology that fills in the missing gap of AI. And I'm talking about Mila Jovovich or Jovovich, actor, model, incredible. And I shared that story. So somebody said to me, because I've shared it a lot, and they said to me the other day, why do you keep telling that story? And I said, well, because once upon a time, the Dalai Lama said that women, especially women in the West, will become the leaders in the world. And I share her story and what she created and then what she did with it to demonstrate what the Dalai Lama was talking about. So the person said, I don't get it. I don't get it. So what? She created AI memory. She's an actor and da 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 da. And she could do that. I said, no, that's not her story. She was rejected by every developer she asked to work with her. And she went to a friend. And they developed memory for AI to fill the gap that AI has. Because I don't know about you, but my AI lost a 200-page project. And so Mila comes in and so then the person said to me, but I still don't get it, Pat. Why? I mean, what is the big deal? I said, well, you're missing the point. This is a woman. Why does she stand out as a leader? She didn't capitalize it. She didn't take it and make $1 trillion, which she could have. They developed a superior memory for AI to fill a gap, 97 to 98% performance. Developed it. And I asked the person, do you know what she did with that? And they're like, and I'm like, hello, I keep talking about her because she gave it away for free. She gave it away. She made this mem palace freeware, GitHub. She gives the code away. So am I really talking about the technology, or am I telling a story about the role model of future leadership?
Sure. And like you're telling a story too about someone, a woman in leadership, a woman who's generous, a woman who's smart, a woman who struggled, a woman who had to find another way, a woman who maybe didn't get recognized in a certain way. And part of that too is like, well, how does that relate to your own story? Right? Because sometimes when we see these other stories, it either inspires us because we're like, that just to me is amazing because I something in me wishes I could do that, or I've had that experience, or it's something that like we aspire to be like that, those values that someone has, like the kind of, and it's I do a similar thing when I talk about Shackleton. Ernest Shackleton was a big explorer in the Antarctic, and love him, and I keep bringing him up a lot, and all
Yeah.
this, and I'm like, he's like my leadership hero though, because he's someone like his story is aspirational, right? And so in his story of survival and getting all the men on his crew didn't die essentially in a 2-year journey where they could have died multiple times, right? And his leadership was attributed to getting them back home safely. And I tell that story too, but I'm like, to me, it's inspiring. I'm like, why do I care? Because I want to be an inspirational leader. Because I think resilience is important. Because I think so. Those stories, I think the story exemplifies that. I get inspired. So those are good. That's good that you bring this up, because sometimes there's internal stories that we tell ourselves, like the greatest hits, and sometimes there's external things in the world, stories that we connect to, stories that inspire us, stories that make us think, stories about people in places, in parts of the world or in different times and in history, but then we still connect and like find inspiration. There's a beautiful quote in one of the Indigo Girls song where they're talking about a telephone line through time, where the reading of this biography is like a telephone, like, oh my God, I feel this person who wrote a book a million years ago, like not years ago, but like it's affecting me now. So that whole thing is stories externally as well kind of shape us. And I think it's good to look at what inspires you about other people's stories. Like you said, why do you keep telling this story? Because I got to, because I'm inspired by it, right? Either because something I aspire to or something I feel like I am and I connect with that.
Yeah. And look, at storytelling is, somebody said to me, I want your comment on this for a minute, Kari. It's fascinating the comments people make about the stories we tell. Now, clearly, me sharing this Mem Palace story over and over again, to some people seem obsessive. But for me, I want to honor this woman, and I have the platform to do it. The other thing is, how many people, I listen to a couple of different people all the time, right? And I have this one person that does a daily kind of thing, right? It has thousands of episodes, right? In what he does. And he tells the same story over and over again. And somebody said to me, I know why he does that. He hasn't really had a hard life. So he has to tell that one story over and over again because that's the only story he has. And I said, wow. I said, that's what you see? I said, yeah, how many times are we going to hear about this guy like winning the Compact Center? And I said, is that that's like what you got out of the story? And then I said something unusual. What part about that is really bothering you? Now, I don't usually go, I mean, honestly, but I was like, okay, yeah, I've heard that story as many times as you, but I've always heard it from a different perspective, and it always reminds me of what's possible in the world. So here I am saying to this person, what is it about him repeating himself that bothers you? And that opened up a whole lot a whole lot. And that's my point to you next. There are the stories we tell about ourselves and the stories we don't. But in this person's case, there was a story that wasn't being told by this person. You know, he wasn't going to tell the story because it was too vulnerable. So let's talk
Yes,
about the stories we tell and the stories we don't. They're
yes. And
equally important.
yes, and sometimes when you think about the stories we don't tell, we're doing it for safety. We're doing it because it is
Woo!
too vulnerable. It's not the right space, the right people, also to protect us. And sometimes the stories we don't tell are involved because it's traumatic. And that's definitely a whole category of the stories we don't tell. There are also stories we don't tell and keep hidden because we're embarrassed by them. It's too vulnerable because then what will people think of me? We feel like, oh, I'm gonna, if I tell the story, it will show that I changed my mind, so I wasn't really committed to it or something. Like it will show things about us where um it doesn't maybe cast us in the best light, and we can't afford in our relationships to wonder, well, now people still think of me the same.
Yeah,
So our brain does a calculation around, is it worth it? Is it worth it? And there's a difference, I think, I gotta say, in our society between like forced vulnerability and actual vulnerability. And I see this a lot when people are like, it's okay, this is a safe space, just share your stuff, share your things. And like, no. I always hate when people say that because I want to say, like, I'll let you know if it's a safe space depending on our relationship, what I feel. Like, you can't force trust or force vulnerability. But sometimes I do feel like people are supposed to like share their deepest, darkest secret. And like, to
yeah,
who, in what venue, for what purpose? Like sometimes
yeah.
those things are sacred to us or hidden for a reason. And I think that's okay too, to think like the idea of exploring it is like, what are the things, are the things I'm keeping hidden influencing my identity just as much as as the things I feel
Yeah.
free to share?
All right.
They're
All
still
right.
there.
Let's get to this though. Let's get down to it because you are a speaker. You are like out there like almost every day, I think. You're being hired to come speak. You have to decide what you're going to share, map it up with the audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
so let me just try to be clear about this because this is very, very important because we're living it. This is me, my opinion. So this is a little hot button for me. I believe we're living in a world now, especially women, where we are being silenced and we don't even know it. 750,000 women lost their jobs last year out of nowhere. And most of them were women of color.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this silencing going on where we're afraid to talk. But we're also afraid to talk for a lot of reasons. But you're a keynote speaker. You're going to get up there and you're going to talk about, maybe you're going to talk about your family. Maybe you're going to talk about your dad, like you did here. Maybe you're going to talk about your life experience that you went through. Maybe you're going to talk about all of that, just like I do. But here's the big but, like it's a giant but. Can you see the but on the screen? Is it your butt or is it my butt? Here it is. Some of us get to a moment where we make a conscious decision, and I know you know this because you do it every day. And we say on this day, because this happened to me during COVID, and it actually happened before COVID, when guidelines in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I know you are familiar with recovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Counselor, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And you know that speaking in public about alcoholism or drug addiction, if you are that person, was a serious no-no, kept everybody off the air except Marty Mann, who was my mentor. For those of you out there, go look up Marty Mann. Marty Mann was a woman, and she got on television shows back in the day. And then we didn't talk about it. But the epidemic of addiction and alcoholism was so deep for me and part of my story, which I didn't really share a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to make a decision to come out and talk about that openly. A lot of backlash from it. So I want to ask you, should I have edited it more? how many versions of that story have I given since that I keep editing? Am I
Sure.
editing? Am I editing to tell the truth? Am I editing to be authentic, or am I editing because I'm afraid, Kari?
Well, those are beautiful questions. And what I love about how you set it up is we edit for so many reasons on one side, and then the other side is who is the audience, right? So the internal editing is, am I still afraid? Can I be authentic in this space? Have I told the story so long the other way that I don't even remember really the right way, or have I kept it hidden for so long I'm scared of what's going to come up? And then again, on the other side, the audience, like, does that story need to be told to someone standing in the line at the supermarket, to an AA group, to a place where your conference is speaking? Like, where does the story show up, and to what I like to say, to what end? Because sometimes I feel people tell their story and the end is like, do I just want to make you feel sorry for me? Do I want to make you sad? Do I want to inspire you? Do I want to connect with you? And then the question too, is this a safe space? And sometimes the answer is no. But you have to think, what's the purpose of the engagement? When we're telling a story, there's usually a purpose to it. Like, people tell me all the time stories in therapy. It's like a one person audience. Here's the story, and here's everything. It's a different environment than if you're at a dinner party or on a giving a keynote. So I think you have to sing on both sides of why we edit our stories and do some internal work, and then also think, who's the audience, because that's a real thing. And again, it doesn't always have to be about trauma that we keep these things secret. It can be
Right.
because it just isn't, I'm not comfortable enough telling the story yet, or the audience is not, like, I think sometimes what I'll see, I'll give this as an example. Sometimes, like, I'll work with people who want to be better speakers, and we'll go through their speech. And essentially, one person I work with said, okay, I'm going to start with a joke, and then I'm going to go into this stat, and then I'm going to tell this story, and then I'm going to do, and it's like, well, what does the joke have to do with the stat, have the story? And the person's like, well, this is a heartwarming story. I'm like, well, what does the heartwarming story have to do with your topic? Or like, what's the end goal with the audience? But they're like, well, I looked it up and it said like an ABC speech is like this, do this, do that. And I had to be like, okay, but what's the point of the stat? What's the point of the joke? What's the point of the story? And who is your audience? And for your case, when you think about addiction, the audience, part of it, you're your own audience, right? Am I ready to hear this story? Am I ready to tell it? What parts of it need telling? And then when you think about, if you did something in an AA group, telling the raw story where people are going to get it and understand you and hold that space for you and not be judgmental
Yeah.
is one thing. Telling that story on a general stage, let's say you're doing a talk as part of a conference,
Very
it's
different.
it's very different. And so that's why we edit, to be like, and maybe I tell a part of the story to show like that I'm, or like if you said like, I'm going to tell part of the story of my recovery because it adds to my topic, or it adds some humanness to the philosophy I'm giving you or telling you. But we have to gauge that. And that's why it's like an internal and an external. And you mentioned me being a speaker. I use stories all the time to share things, but I also make sure I share things that are not wounds. They are not open wounds. They are scars. They have been scarred over. I could see the scars still, but I'm not having a wound. And I think that's important to think about too, because if I haven't processed it myself and like I'm able to talk about it, what am I actually doing to the audience if I'm sharing that? What am I trying to get from them? What am I trying to make them feel? And as a speaker, I'm in charge here. I'm taking you on a journey, but I'm not leaving it hanging. And I don't want you to worry about me as a speaker. And when I'm in the role as a speaker, I don't want you to worry about me. Right. And so if it's something as a wound and I'm not ready to talk about it, it's off the table for me. Right. But if I'm in my therapy session and I want to talk about something and the wounds, that might be a great place to get into it. Right. Or if I'm with other speakers and we're talking about how to utilize stories, and I'll be like, well, which of this part of the story exemplifies my point most? Here's the whole story. Which part should I pull out? Right. So again, sometimes you have to tell the whole story to make a point, but it's good. The stories we edit it's kind of a murky but cool area because you have
It
to ask
is.
the internal and the external questions.
Yeah. And this is what I love about it because storytelling is very, very powerful. And, here's the thing that came up as I was preparing for this today, Kari. And the thing that came up for me is something I've said out loud. And I can't remember exactly how I phrased it. Depends on my mood, right? And I think I said something like, okay, I think I think texting is going to get rid of our storytelling ability. I made that statement one day. And somebody came back to me, like 50 people, and said, did you know that you have to be a great storyteller to text well? Okay. Okay, now what do I have? I have a new level of awareness. So I asked myself, as Byron Katie would do, is that true? Is what I said true? Because there's a new story now to tell. And it's the story of the world of technology that allows us to not only edit our stories, but we live in a world of technology that could take a story that we put in, especially using AI, and spit out something else that is nothing like our story. And yet we think it's the story we're going to own. And so we're living in this space where we're trying to keep up with ourselves. To my friend's point, and to your point, the person that they were referencing was Joel Osteen. Now, I don't know how many people know Joel, but I will tell you, he's a pastor, he's a minister, and he does tell this story a lot, but he tells it in different contexts. And that's what I wanted to ask you. What's the relationship between storytelling and context? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, and I think that's so important because in storytelling, again, performative storytelling, when you're like I'm telling a story because I'm a speaker and I'm trying to use it. He's telling a story because he's a pastor and he's trying to make a point. But if still we're telling stories, like if I'm in the grocery store talking to someone, or I'll say this, I've talked to someone recently who's about to have their first baby, and it's a friend of a friend, and just like what stories would it be good to tell a person who hasn't had a kid yet, and what stories you're like, I don't want to tell you this because you don't need to know, right? I don't want to scare you, right? Like, so like those stories in context of like new mom, hopeful, and all that, like, you're gonna dredge up every worst story ever, right? And be like, I hope you survive, versus like, here's what, here's some tips, or here's what it is, or here's some great experience. Like, again, know your audience. But the performative part about that, even in my show, I do a one-woman storytelling show. It's a performance around stories, and the stories are all true and they're real. But when you edit a story, you think about, oh, I might have to compress the story. And like, because you like when you think about, do I need to tell all the parts of the story? You could tell a story about something that happened over 5 years in 3 minutes, right? Like, so you have to compress it. You also have to think of the arc of like the emotion. And I think you also, what's the point of the story? What's the point? And what information do you keep in and what do you let out to help drive the point? And sometimes you say the point is pure entertainment because it's just funny. Sometimes you say the point is to like share an emotion that, instead of saying, like I said, I felt embarrassed, the story when my tights fell down in front of 300 people, right? Like that's a better story and how I got through it. But all those things are like, how we choose to edit to me isn't necessarily problematic unless we are editing so much that we're like, what's the
Yeah.
actual true story, right? Like, I'm editing it for this audience, or
Oh,
like, what's the whole story? Can I look in the parts? Do I know the parts that I'm not telling? Do I recognize that I'm more complex than this? Is I can see this example is what it's for, but then do I remember and understand, as the storyteller, as the keeper of the stories, the whole thing? And am I not just bringing up the best parts of myself always to show other people and myself? Can I be okay with my complexity? And can I be okay with my dualistic things? Sometimes I'm an awesome, inspiring person, and sometimes I'm angry and bitter, and sometimes I'm hopeful, and sometimes I'm just dejected, and sometimes I'm happy and joyful, and sometimes I'm sad and angry, all in the same person. And so that's the thing with editing our stories. When you think about performing a story, it's one thing. When you think about who's your audience, and I would say performing, you are performing stories all the time. All the time. When you interview for a job, you're performing your story,
absolutely.
right? When you're meeting someone for the first time, when you're at a dinner party, all the things. But the editing part that we really want to think psychologically about is, can I still hold the space for the whole version of myself? And am I still worthy of love, even if I'm not always great or positive or
Yeah.
hopeful or whatever? Am I still a human being, right? And can I hold the whole story in here? And I think
Yeah.
that's important, because sometimes we edit so far, we're like, I don't even know if it's true anymore. I don't even know what part of the stories I'm leaving out anymore, or I'm only shaping it to have this viewpoint of it, but I'm forgetting this. That's when it gets dangerous, because you lose your identity in the process of editing. And sometimes we've edited and edited and edited, and we're like, what's the actual story?
Exactly. But part of this is storytelling is a great way to prove either a method, an approach, a lesson, a learning, right? There are stories we use about ourselves. But I will tell you that when I talk about my homeless story, and if I share it in a show, I give you the cliff notes,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't take people through the agonizing journey of what it was like to come home one day and find all of my things on my front lawn, my parents threw out. Because for me, that's going to miss the point of what I'm about to share, because my homeless journey taught me lessons that have gotten me to where I am today. But I could spend an hour talking about what the feeling was like about all of my things thrown on the lawn, and my brother, who I raised, hanging onto a tree with his little hamster, asking me if I'm ever going to come back. I mean, that in itself, that just brings tears to my eyes to think about. If
Mm-hmm.
I were telling that story of loss and repair, that would be the part of the story. But most of the time, I'm telling the story of how to find opportunity in the worst place you've ever been. You know,
Yeah.
how dumpster diving gave me the job of my life, selling hot dogs. So we don't always have to share every detail. Doesn't it depend on what our goal is?
Yes, and it also is good because we don't want performative vulnerability. Sharing a whole story is a lot for you, right? And it brings up things in spaces that you're like, I don't know if I want to share that part of the story, or that's not in service of what I'm doing in the relationship, right? Like we can think about that. And I do think the performative vulnerability piece is like, share it all, and like I do think, like, when you even said it so well, here's the whole story, here's the part that I share, and here's why, or here's the part that comes up for me, and this is still hard when I think about this other part, right? It still like gets me every time. That's great that it still gets you every time, because it's heartbreaking, and we don't want to miss the heartbreak with also the resilience. But for, like you said, on a speech, you're doing like, what's the point of the story? And sometimes when I work with people on speeches, I'll always be like, what's the point of the story? What is the
Bingo,
point of the story? What is the point?
bingo.
I'll just repeat it again and again. What's the point of the story? And then someone will be like, also, how many details do we need? Do we need to know that your shoes were blue and that the balloon you had was yellow? Is that an important thing? Or is it okay that you were wearing shoes and there was a balloon there? Like, but maybe it is. Maybe the color is important. I don't know. But sometimes people include so much detail, you lose it. And crafting a story is a skill. It's a skill to be able to say, what do I keep in? What do I put out? What is the point of the story? And again, who's my audience? Here's what I see other people do this. They'll be like, contact me for help with being a better speaker. And they'll be like, I'm working on my keynote. I'm working on my keynote. I need help with my keynote. And I said, okay, well, who's it for? How long is it? Who's in the audience? What's the conference about? What is the objective? And they're like, I don't know, I'm just making my keynote. I'm like, for nobody? For You're just making a keynote. And I think it's fine to put ideas down of what you would talk about, but until you know the audience and
Yeah,
the time you have available, and
yeah.
this is a big thing. My storytelling show is not 5 days long, and it's not 5 hours long. It's an hour and a half. So I have so much time tell my stories, right? And then you're thinking also, when you're networking or something, you only have so much time to tell a story. So you have to be thoughtful about how and when and what you share. And I feel like the editing part, like, again, that's the external facing. I want to talk a little bit about the internal editing too.
Yeah,
Like,
let's do that, because that's very important. Because isn't the internal editing, doesn't it hit, the scale of emotions and so forth and so on? And I want to know what you think about this and say about it, because what I have found with internal editing, my emotions drive my decision, not a solid, reliable mind.
Well, that's why it's hard, because when we're internally editing, it's emotion driven usually. And the reason we they're choose things to share or not, some things are really emotional. And again, it's more of a wound than a scar, or it's embarrassing, or what will people think? And then we get into our heads about, can I share this or not? Sometimes to our detriment, though, because sometimes we make a decision, I can't share this. And if we did, it might bring us closer to people who love us, or make us more multidimensional, or it might help us remember I am very complex and I can hold all these things about myself. We forget, no, I can only be good or happy or not, whatever you think you have to be. So the internal editing part, I just want to give an example of when it gives you insight to be like, why have I internally edited this, to what end? And like, maybe have I outgrown that need, or is it safe now? And like, for me, if you said, tell me, I always say this is going to be the title of my book. My mom was a nun, my dad was gay, my sister was adopted from Vietnam, and I married a one-armed man. Like, there's everything you need to know about me. All those things are true. Right? So
I don't mean to laugh at you. I just think that is a perfect example of raw, vulnerable, and powerful all together.
That's all. And that to me is that's the summary statement. And then we could go a whole bunch of different directions with that, right? And was your dad really gay? Yes. Did he really marry an ex-nun? Yes. Was your sister adopted from Vietnam? Uh-huh. And did you marry one or man? Yep. Pick any topic, right? And then I've always taken myself out of the narrative, because see all these other people we're talking about, but like, where am I in that? And I think that I centered, by saying that, I always centered around other people, but I've never had my experience in that, in those relationships. Similarly, I would have said, if you said, well, how was it growing up? I'd be like, oh, it's fine. My dad came out when I was 8, and then he went to go live in a different part of the town. He went to go live in Denver. We stayed in Broomfield. And then I was really proud of him because he found his gay identity. And then I grew up and I was fine. And I really would like, just be like, and then I was fine. And then it,
I know.
and then, and that is true. That is part of the story, right? I did grow up and I'm fine. But this is the internal editing part that I didn't, and I realize now why I did it. I did it for protection, because as a child, when I was 8, I didn't understand how to process the divorce. My dad had to go deal with his coming out situation. Wait, my mom had to freak out and be like, oh my God, what's happening? My sister went her own direction. We all went our own ways. And then also they said, by the way, you have to keep it a secret because dad could lose his job or worse.
Exactly.
And here's an 8-year-old. Keep a really big secret for an adult. Like, that's okay, right? But I never question it, because you just live it. And some things you're like, okay, I'll just keep this big secret. It won't have any impact on me. It had a huge impact on me. But I was just adapting. And sometimes we tell our stories, we adapt to the moment, because I don't have the capacity to, as an 8-year-old, to process that. So then I just grow up and I keep that same idea that I'm okay. And then now, as a 54-year-old, and I'm like, what I've been reflecting on it more since my mom passed, actually, because I think some of the secrets of families, when people pass or when things change, you start to be able to talk about things. And I'm like, what if I wasn't okay? What if that was a really big deal? What if it was horrible that no one checked in on a child? What if it was weird to think like, we'll ask you to keep a secret? So now more of that story is coming up for me to be like, huh? And have I told my family story so many times, like, yep, and I was fine. And there's no room for me to, well, I was not actually fine. And that was a lot to manage. And I never talked about it. And I also became kind of secretive and never expressed my feelings because I didn't think there was a space for me in the story. Right. And like, it's just really amazing how we can see a story and then a truth. And then there's a truer truth, and another perspective and more meaning. And now it's safer for me to tell that story. Somehow it took from 8 to 54, but now I can finally start telling the story.
Well,
And I think
exactly.
that happens to all of us. We have things that we'll be like, we can go back to spaces. Sometimes it becomes safe for some reason, or we want to, or we realize we're only telling such a limited version that it's not serving us.
And this is part of what we do. And what I love about this conversation is really getting at the underpinnings of why we do it. And you know what? It's also important to say there's no right or wrong. And I think that's the trap we fall into sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe I should have shared earlier about my mom being an addict, alcoholic. Well, really? You can't go back and change it. So why are you thinking about that? And, there's this process about storytelling and sharing that we have to grow into. And I think that's what you're talking about, the work you do with other people. There's this growth spurt period where I want to be a keynote speaker. And you really get all eager about it until you learn that keynote speaking has a formula. There are things that you share to match what your client wants you to talk about. So then
Yes.
you have to edit your story again.
Yes, but that's why you're being in service of the person who hired you for the conference, for the outcome that they want. What's the theme of their conference? Why did they hire you? What's your topic? How's it impacting? Are you the opener? Are you the lunch? Are you the closer? What are you leaving people with? Right. And then but that to me is part of being a good speaker, is like, I'm in service of the audience and the person who hired me. What do they want out of this experience? How can I use my speaking to give them that experience? But I always ask people, what is the outcome you want from this presentation?
Yeah.
What is the outcome? Is it to feel energized, motivated? Is it to be reflectful? Is it give people time to connect? What's the outcome? Is it to send people out of there ready to go to the conference? Is it to wrap things up in a way that feels like, yeah, we came together? Like, but you as a speaker edit all the time. Like, and I have to laugh because my husband will see me working on my talks, and let's say I talk about emotional intelligence, like that's 70% of what I probably talk about. And he will see me working on a presentation and he'll be like, you just gave this talk. Like, why are you still, and I'm like, and I have books out and I'll have my computer open and I'll have written notes. I'll have like nothing. And I'm like, well, because I learned something different than I was sure, or this would be so good for this audience. Or like, I feel like I'm trying to incorporate this, my timing needs to be better for this, or this one is 45 minutes and this was an hour and 15, right? So like, but I'm constantly, and I think he's a little bit exasperated because he's like, you want just take it off the shelf. And I'm like, nope, it just won't
No,
work.
you
It won't work
can't.
because I think what you said is so true. We know your audience, know that. And again, we're talking about from the example of being a speaker, but I think also knowing your audience in your life. What friends can you really share things with and you feel connected with? And but I also would say, what stories could you tell with your friends that might help them feel more connected to you? Like, can you share yourself with certain people in different ways? Also, in the world at large, sometimes we're so busy playing the greatest hits that we don't say, what other things can I bring up that might help me connect with this person,
Yeah.
or see the world in a different way, or expand something about me? What's a different way, right, of showing up in the world? And can I practice? Can I sort of think about my complexity and what I might have to share?
Yeah. It's so important to really think these things through because what you're talking about today is one, be aware that you have a story to tell. Two, understand that you have to be in alignment. The stories that we're telling, whether it be to ourselves or family, friends, the public, companies, you have to be in alignment, right?
Well,
What is your purpose behind the story,
Well,
right?
and I'll say this too. I think social media has shifted our ability to tell the true story about ourselves, because I think a lot of, and someone asked me this straight up, and I was like, is this a real question? Like, what's your brand personality? And I was like, my brand personality is me. Like, but I was like so shocked about like, and I do think social media though, what do we put up on social media? What do we not? Like, everyone on social media, I think when you're putting something up on social media, you're not like, here's my worst day ever. You're usually pretty, look at this great meal I made. Look at this fabulous place I went to. Look what I did. Look at my cute new hat. Look how great my kids are. Look how clean my house, whatever you're doing. And you're performing to me for social context. And sometimes we're so out of like our social media presence,
Yeah.
and our real lives it's a big disconnect for some people. And I think that's another thing that other generations didn't have to consider, that we will have to consider. Um,
Oh,
what are we putting out there to the world, on social media, either on our personal pages or our professional pages. And again, that's cultivate. What do you put on your professional site versus your personal site? Different things. But this is a thing that is tricky for a lot of us. Like, how do I navigate my persona and
Yeah.
that?
Well, it's fascinating you bring that up because, when people know me for this, except the people that know me when I'm not, outside of my occupation. But I'll go to like an event, a networking event, and I'll be sitting at a table. And I don't say very much. And people want to know if I'm okay. And then I have to explain how much of an introvert I am.
Oh, yes.
Right. And
Yes.
so I realized, wait a minute. I don't want to keep explaining that I'm an introvert. That's another story. If I'm going to go to an outside event, people are going to want me to be the person they see on air. And geez, Pat, that's not that hard to do. Right. But it is a stretch because it cuts against who I really am. When I'm out at a network event, I'm no different, except I'm just extremely curious about other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk less about myself, but it's a shock for people to see me not this.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real shock, right?
Yeah. I'd say
And
the
then
same for me too, like, because
yeah,
when we have our external sides, because I'm a performer, so like I'm performing and I'm speaking and I'm doing my show and I'm doing my stuff, and then I need my quiet time too. It's like some people are shocked. Like my favorite thing to do is honestly travel by myself or be by myself for a little bit because nobody knows me or nobody can has an idea of myself that I live up to. So sometimes when you travel by yourself, you're not with someone negotiating things, but then it's easy for other people to approach you. But when you're traveling and not in your familiar circles, people see you for you, not your persona. And then you get to be more well-rounded because I like you, like I'm very extroverted and I have an introverted part of me that needs to be taken care of. But it's hard too when you're like seen publicly in a certain way. It's a real thing that we cultivate. Like, and you're a very complex, multifaceted person, just like me, just like everyone else. And so either people are going to put you in that box or you put yourself in the box. And again, that the invitation is not to be judgy about it, but be curious. Like, where's that serving me? Where is it not serving me? And also the invitation I love about what you said is, can I invite people to see me in different ways? Can I
yeah,
invite a different perspective on myself, like by sharing, or like you said, I like to listen more than I like to talk in these events. Like that's beautiful way to think about your approach, to get more out of it and to show up more holistically. Pat, or I like when you call yourself Patty, because
exact
there's Dr. Pat, and Patty. And I
Patty.
think
Yeah,
people know you at different parts of your life, but I'm like,
absolutely.
and that's a great way to think about it. Oh, what do I want out of this interaction and how am I showing up? Again, not just on autopilot. The invitation is to bring some awareness. And that to me is where the excitement comes, when I have some awareness.
But it's interesting to have fun. And I know we already have a few minutes left, but here's the whole point to this. What I love about what you're bringing up today for me is we are multidimensional people and we can show up differently. It doesn't mean we're not authentic and we're not our authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
We show up differently. For years, Alanis Morissette was called the angry girl singer, right? I mean, that because what did she write about? Some of her songs were like that until she wrote Thank You, that
Mm-hmm.
song. Now she confused the public. Well, are you angry girl or are you grateful girl? And, but the point is this, we get to be whoever we are and we get to cultivate the stories we want to tell to
Mm-hmm.
really match wherever we are and what we do. But it is very important to be aware of who you're sharing the story with, when to share, when not to share, when to edit, when not to edit.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes the story isn't about you, it's about listening to the other person. And I think that's part of the journey, in this me, I world. I want to hear Joel Osteen tell that story 1,000 times. I want to hear how he kept faith and through some magical thing, he got the last vote to build the compact center. I want to hear the story of how he was going to get sued and they weren't going to be able to build. But then one day, magically, the suit went away. See, why do I want to hear that? Because I need those stories for myself to remember what's possible, not what's probable, not the guesswork. And this is part of it. My journey and your journey, when we do the shows, we're pretty upbeat. We're sometimes funny. And we will get backlash, and backlash is a funny word, but we'll get feedback. Like the other day, somebody said, Pat, Dr. Pat, I cannot believe that you're talking about the Resident Evil movies. Do you actually watch them? And I'm like, yeah, was a game. It's about zombies. It's about heroes. It's about badass women. I do. But then I explain how I got to be there, what my childhood was like, why my only escape were movies like that, how they became my point of comfort, how I took Frankenstein to bed with me every night, asking him to protect me from my horrific childhood. You see, it can open that door, can it?
Yes, it can. And if you know that, right, you know that about yourself, then you decide how and when you share that. But also, you don't let someone else define, I can't believe you do that. Well, here's why, and here's why. But I think people do that a lot of times. I can't believe this about you. I can't believe, well, believe it. Because like, I'm a complex, interesting person, and I'm not always what you think I am. And again, that's identity.
I know.
We project it, and other people reinforce it. But then sometimes we have our own, and we limit it. And that's what you're talking about, like with the little exploration and curiosity, we don't have to limit what we know about ourselves, and the stories that we tell about ourselves and the stories we experience are really good conduits for self-awareness. And it's that line between like knowing them and then sharing them. When you think about, okay, who and to what end and what's the purpose of it, but I'm not going to edit myself. I'm going to at least know for myself my story. And I think tapping into that is great self-awareness. It's empowering. It helps you see what you've been through. It sees what's possible. And then I think, like you said, stories is a way to connect. I feel like listening to other people's stories, sharing stories, connecting through stories is so powerful.
Yeah,
Make
I
sure
agree.
you're not missing out, right? By limiting yourself to the greatest hits. Like, and think about that, like, how could we connect in more authentic, meaningful ways and use our stories for external connection and internal knowledge.
When you think about it, Kari, and thank you for today. When you think about it, if it weren't for those people scratching hieroglyphics on a wall, hello, we would know nothing. So we need to learn how to scratch our own hieroglyphics on a wall. Yes. Thank you for today. What is the best way for people to find out more about you?
They can go to knutsonspeaks.com, KNUTSON speaks.com. It has information about my show, about coaching, about my topics and keynotes and presentations, and all about me, basically.
Awesome. Thank you so much for today. And you know what? Stories are the things that dreams are made of. Dreams are the things that visions are made up. Visions are the things that allow us to act in ways that we don't even believe are possible, but we have the faith we know we can. Thank you for all of that. Thank you, Kari.
Thanks, Dr. Pat.
To all of you out there, what's your story? Are you compromising on it? Do you know how to align? Are you willing to at least embrace the story of your life for yourself? We'll see you next time.
You have been listening to Get Big Out Loud Radio, where we explore the complex, funny, and beautiful ride of life with me, Kari Knutson, joining Dr. Pat live every second Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com. I will help you to know which thoughts are keeping you small in order for you to get big. Get big and live your life out loud. For more information, visit KnutsonSpeaks.com.